Hi everyone, I'm Liz Hunter. I'm the Associate Director of Field Sales for Workman Publishing, coming at you from my apartment in Brooklyn, New York, my fall 2020 Reps Picks. Tiny Love Stories comes from the New York Times column of the same name, and it's curated by the editors of Modern Love. These 175 stories are submitted by readers, and every story is less than 100 words long. These moving, inspirational, uplifting, heartwarming, and heartbreaking love stories are handpicked by the editors from the thousands of submissions they receive. I love that this book celebrates many different kinds of love: romantic, familial, platonic, parental, self-love, and all of the shades in between. This moving book is 5 by 7, so it's that feels good in the hand kind of size, and it would make a perfect gift for anyone who you love. Now, because the stories really speak for themselves, I'm gonna attempt to read you a couple, and I will try not to get teary, but I swear to you this book gets me every time. Boy meets girl. They date in college. Boy drops bombshell by taking job offer in Japan. Does she want to join? Girl thinks it over and decides to take a chance. They move to Japan, then the Philippines, then back to the United States. Boy becomes girl. Girl and girl remain madly in love years later. Tiny Love Stories is coming out from Artisan December 8th. Our imprint story, based in the Berkshires of Massachusetts, has a long tradition of publishing books that are practical and useful. Books about growing vegetables, raising animals, cooking, crafting. In the curious compendium of practical and obscure skills, the editors at Story have compiled hundreds of different skills, drawing from the books in their vast library. Every page has a step-by-step photos, and it's a delightful mix of things you might actually do, like spatchcock a chicken or sew a pillowcase or fix a broken window, and things that you didn't know you needed to know, like how to French braid a horse's tail, or teach your cat to jump through a hoop, or make a hammock. It's this great big book. It's 9.5 by 12 inches in trim size. It's 344 pages, full color. This is like the best coffee table book ever. It's beautiful, it's useful, and you'll learn some things. Story's Compendium of Practical and Obscure Skills is coming out September 15th. Down Along with That Devil's Bones by Connor Town O'Neill is a powerful work of journalistic nonfiction about the fight to remove Confederate monuments across the South. O'Neill is a producer on the NPR podcast White Lies. Originally from Pennsylvania, he currently teaches at Auburn University. In this book, he looks specifically at 4 monuments honoring Nathan Bedford Forrest, a general of the Confederate Army and the first Grand Wizard of the KKK. The monuments are in Selma, Alabama, Nashville, Memphis, and Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Through the course of his investigation, O'Neill argues that those who fight to literally put this man on a pedestal are practicing the selective amnesia that plagues so many white Americans. We want to pat ourselves on the back for being from the greatest democracy on earth, yet we look away from the facts of our history that conflict with that flattering image. Namely, that the institutions of slavery and white supremacy were baked into our country from its very foundation. We built statues to the military men, but ignore the fact that this particular man was fighting for the right to enslave other humans. Like in Murfreesboro, where the statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest in the center of town is only feet away from the old market where enslaved people were bought and sold. Despite the monument's boosters who claim that this is about remembering history, there is curiously no plaque or marker to indicate where the slave market was. This book hit me on a deeply personal level. I'm originally from the suburbs of Nashville, Tennessee, and I drove past one of the monuments that he covers in the book hundreds of times. Widely regarded as the Confederate monument that is so ugly it accidentally disproves white supremacy, I knew that this particular statue was created by the lawyer who defended the man who murdered Martin Luther King Jr. What I didn't know was that it was only one out of 31 monuments to Nathan Bedford Forrest in my home state. More than all of the statues of the 3 presidents from Tennessee, Jackson, Johnson, and Polk, combined. I learned so much reading this book. The thing that I thought was so brilliant about it is the monuments themselves become a lens through which we can understand the legacy of white supremacy in America and how far-reaching that is. It's from Appomattox to Charlottesville. We get into the alt-right and how that new right wing connects to leaders like Nathan Bedford Forrest and that tradition. It's a brilliant book. And beyond that, I think it's the kind of book that can help us understand what's at stake in these conversations about monuments and how to move forward and have a more productive conversation about them. I read this book in one day. I could not put it down. Down along with that, Devil's Bones is an indie next pick, and it publishes on September 29th. I don't know about you, but it seems like my wine intake may have gone up slightly during quarantine. So what could be a better time to actually learn about wine so I have something to show for all of these months drinking in my apartment? Enter Madeline Meyer, our author of Welcome to Wine. She's got deep roots in the world of wine. She's from a 5th-generation wine family in Switzerland, and she's furthered her apprenticeship in the wine business in the vineyards of her mother's native California. On top of that, Madeline has earned a wine specialist degree. But the feeling of this book is incredibly friendly and approachable, despite her very professional background. It covers the basics, like what kind of glass to use, how to store your wine, suggested food and wine pairings. What really sets this book apart, though, are the illustrations. I find these illustrations to be extremely helpful when you get into the more nuanced parts. How to tell if a wine has gone bad, how to develop your palate, what the aroma tells you. With these illustrations throughout and a paper overboard package, this book will make a really great gift to anyone who wants to learn more about wine. For this title, I'm going to do something a little bit different than the talk over the PowerPoint thing that I've been doing because I actually have a finished copy here. This is The Constitution Decoded, written by Katie Kennedy and illustrated by Ben Kirshner. This is coming out from Workman and actually it just published September 1st. Katie is an educator. She's been teaching history for 30 years and she is based in Iowa. So what this book does is it walks you through the literal text of the Constitution. It shows you how that translates into modern day speak. So it walks us through all of the articles of the Constitution and the amendments. But what it also does is it explains what's in the Constitution, sure, but also what's left out of the Constitution. So for example, the preamble. We, the people of the United States. Over here, the book raises the question, who are the people? The framers of the Constitution used the phrase we the people in the preamble, but the new government didn't represent everyone in the country at the time or even later. And it goes on to explain why Black people, women, Native Americans, and immigrants like Chinese and Irish, and gay and transgender people have been kept from fully using their constitutional rights. So one thing that really struck me as reading this was, yes, all of this historical context is so helpful, but There's so many things that are in the news today in our cultural conversation that date all the way back to the Constitution. Section 8 of Article 1, the establishment of the post office, giving that power to the federal government. Impeachment and how that process will work. I love this illustration of a Ruth Bader Ginsburg looking justice. The right to peacefully protest. All of this is in the Constitution, and it's in the Constitution decoded. This book is a must read for any kid and frankly parent who wants to understand how this document shapes our nation and our lives today.
Hey indie booksellers, I'm Christian Westerman from Workman Publishing. I'm looking forward to connecting with you guys over great books during the show and hearing more about how things are going at your store. Here are some of the fall 2020 titles that I'm especially excited about. I've got How to Astronaut from Terry Virts, An Insider's Guide to Leaving Planet Earth. It's on sale this September, but this is different from other books about astronauts. It focuses more on the daily part of it. There's 51 short chapters in this book where Terry takes you through training, launch, orbit, what spacewalking is like, deep space, and re-entry. Terry Virts, he's the star of this space show in this book. His personality really makes How to Astronaut a great reading experience. He's charismatic, and it's written with such a warm and funny voice. You get a feeling in reading each short chapter that his childish wonderment of space has never left him. He's so enthusiastic about everything, and knowing how tough astronaut work is after reading this, I could only marvel at Terry's unflinching enthusiasm despite the fatigue, risks, and responsibility. It's really inspiring. He talks about things like in-flight entertainment. Yes, they have Netflix and they have Hulu too. He's also talks about what astronauts dream of and falling asleep and being in sleep while you're floating in midair. How do they go to the bathroom, for instance? It's a really fun book. But really, the best part of this book is the astronaut's perspective. Yes, the universe is immense, beautiful, but it's also cold, barren, and inhospitable. Going to space made him realize just how much he cherishes home, which is Earth. Love, Zach, by author Reed Forgrave, is an emotionally gripping page-turner and true story of a young man named Zach Easter, who was only 24 years old when he committed suicide using his father's gun. He decided to take his own life rather than continue his losing battle against the traumatic brain injuries from CTE he had sustained as a no-holds-barred high school football player. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, is a brain disease associated with athletes in high-contact sports, especially football. It is characterized by severe headaches, brain tremors, slurred speech, blurred vision, dementia, and other physical ailments. Zach bravely fought this disease after playing football from 3rd grade through high school, but the suffering ultimately proved to be too much for him to go on with. Zach grew up in the small town of Indianola, Iowa, so as a graduate of the University of Iowa, his story moved me like no other book I've read in recent memory. I know how much pride Iowans take in their football and how much their values of hard work and community is in the football players that effectively represent them. Zach's own family history dates back to before the Civil War, and he lived a version of manhood that stems from generations of living off the land. Zach was such a selfless person, which is best exemplified by his last request to tell his story far and wide so that there is more awareness about this mental illness, more research, and that no one else has to suffer from the head traumas like he did. He found the thought of all the lives that can be saved from this kind of advocacy to be a very powerful one. Love, Zach is more than just about sports because Zach was more than just a football player. He had fallen in love with a girl named Allie who was a law student. In addition to a loving mother and father, he had 2 brothers and they always enjoyed going on hunting trips together. He was a decorated soldier of the Iowa National Guard and recently graduated high school with a 4.0 GPA, and it just seemed like a better life was still ahead for him. This book is about what it means to be a man in 21st century America. It's about parenting, especially what fathers pass on to their sons, and that there's a blurry line where traditional views on masculinity cross over into toxic masculinity. It's about America's addiction to violence, not just in sports, that violence is part of who we are, and it calls into question what we value as a nation. Using Zach's donated journal to understand his life and personal battle with CTE, author Reed Forgrave honors Zach's final wish to bring to the forefront his concerns about the safety of the sport. Algonquin will be partnering with CTE Hope so that a portion of the proceeds from sales will go to helping this cause. From Meryl Marco, Emmy Award-winning head writer for the original David Letterman show, and one of the most renowned and influential comedy writers in recent history, We Saw Scenery is a funny and poignant, spot-on self graphic novel. It's written in a diary format that takes us through Marco's preteen and teen years. Marco hits all the marks with her 1960s pop cultural references, family dramas, and so-called romantic interludes through the voice of a teenage girl. The older and wiser adult Marco makes frequent appearances throughout the book to dialogue with her younger self and alternately offers withering criticism or big sister empathy as the situation should require, which really makes for some great banter. In addition to the idea that as children and adolescents we blow everything out of proportion, the situations Marco covers will be relatable to any adult reflecting on their own youth. Her literal and self-deprecating style of humor is in moments like when she refers to her hippocampus, which we know as the area of the brain thought to be principally involved in storing long-term memories and in making those memories resistant to forgetting. But in We Saw Scenery, an actual school campus with big hippos roaming around eating grass, with Meryl asking them questions of what she was thinking in the moments of some particularly embarrassing moments. The book's title makes reference to the cross-country family road trip that happens mid-diary that Marco endured for the purpose of relocating from Florida to San Francisco, and as such is more of an ironic joke in terms of summarizing her adolescence. Capturing the hilarious difficulties of growing up, We Saw Scenery is perfect for fans of Ali Brosh, Roz Chast, and Linda Barry. So get the tea out, and it's got to be English breakfast for these books. Myrtle Hardcastle Mysteries is a new debut middle grade series set in Victorian England. It's reminiscent of Harriet the Spy, Flavia de Luce, and classic books like The Hardy Boys. It's intended for middle graders, but really getting a quick adult following because of how cozy it is, perfect for the fall, and some hot cocoa, for instance, and as well as how well written they are. Readers are introduced to a new heroine, Myrtle Hardcastle, who is a spunky and smart 12-year-old girl who's a Victorian girl of science obsessed with the new sciences of criminology. She's determined to seek out the truth even when nobody else believes her. As one reviewer put it on Goodreads, it's hard to dislike this girl's determination. Books 1 and 2 simultaneously pub this fall on October 6th, and Premeditated Myrtle is the first book in the series, which was recently announced as a Kids Indie Next List pick. When her elderly neighbor dies, Myrtle is the only one who suspects foul play, and her determined sleuthing takes her into the world of rare plants and forensic science. Myrtle is assisted by a governess and her mentor, the invincible Miss Judson. Together they investigate. Myrtle uses her medical knowledge from her late mother and her legal knowledge from her father to ultimately solve the case with a cast of interesting characters that range from a legal aide to a writer. How to Get Away with Myrtle, and for any Poirot fans or anyone that likes Murder on the Orient Express, this one's perfect. It's a classic Victorian railways holiday in the countryside that is livened up by jewel thieves and murder. Finally, Elizabeth C. Bunce, the author, turned in book 3 recently called Cold-Blooded Myrtle and is planned for a fall 2021 release. I personally absolutely adored Myrtle's strong relationships with her father, who is a court prosecutor, and also her relationship with Miss Judson. These three main characters, Myrtle, her father, and Miss Judson, all have moments of conflict in their relationships when they each want different things and they disagree and argue. But in the end, those conflicts strengthen and invigorate their love for each other as they learn from one another. This is brilliant writing from Elizabeth C. Bunce. Then we have On Fragile Waves, also from Erewhon, but this one is more literary. And it's a profoundly human story. It follows an Afghani family fleeing war who sets off for Australia to start anew. It really centers on a girl named Fairuza, and she's kind of reliving her experiences in a magical realist way of dreams, as well as what she witnesses when she's moved to Australia, sort of the experiences of the war in Afghanistan, as well as the assimilation in Australia. And I think what's even really more important here is both areas, both homes to her now are in conflict. In Australia, you have sort of the conversation around immigrants, whether they belong or not. That is a form of conflict. And then obviously the violence and the war that was in Afghanistan. Really, really interesting point of view. And this speaks to immigration, the difficulties of quote unquote assimilating. Fairuza runs up against xenophobia, but also what to do about her family traditions and how she traditionally dresses, for instance. But it's for readers of literary fiction about social questions and exploring contemporary political issues, and any reader of speculative fiction with political themes and beautiful prose. Lily traveled to Kabul, Jakarta, and Melbourne, interviewing asylum seekers, refugees, and detainees for this book. During an internship in Canberra, She researched private companies that handle screening, detainment, imprisonment, basically the dirty work of the government, and was really astounded at what they do. And it just feels like such an important book, and it's coming out this December. It really reminded me of Valeria Luiselli's The Lost Children Archives, which is another grand, harrowing journey relived through imagination with urgency and empathy.
Hi everyone, my name is Ali McNamara and I'm the sales coordinator with the field sales team at Workman, and I'm going to be sharing with you a couple of my favorite books from the fall 2020 list. I Believe in You is by the Dream Team sister duo, Sabrina and Eunice Moyle. They're the team behind Hello Lucky, and they recently had 2 books come out with Workman on the most recent spring list, ABC Dance and Goodnight Baboon. This is our 3rd book with us, and I love this book. I mean, how could I not? It's a unicorn and dragon BFF duo that are all about validating one's feelings and boosting confidence. Count me in. The artwork is adorable, playful, and colorful, right alongside messages like, if you feel sad, I'll be right here. Got things to say? Well, I'm all ears. This book is destined to become a classic and a staple for every child, and maybe even adults. Now we have Baking at the 20th Century Cafe, and this is truly the cookbook of my dreams. And honestly, Michelle Polzin is probably my hero. She's without a doubt my style icon. In case you're not already familiar with her, Michelle is the owner of the 20th Century Cafe in San Francisco and is basically the queen of European desserts. And she's blessed us all with her magnificent cookbook that's coming out this October. The photography in this book is next level. It was painful for me to even flip through the pages because I want everything. There's apricot cherry cobbler, Meyer lemon pudding tart, honey cake, date pistachio tart, and so much more. Everyone who loves dessert and or happiness needs this cookbook. I promise you. Kids are the future is something I heard frequently growing up. And I would always think, well, duh. And now we have As the World Burns by Lee Vandervoo, and my duh moment has never felt so justified. Vandervoo covers the story of Juliana versus United States, what will likely become one of the biggest civil rights cases in history. 21 young people are suing the United States government over climate change, arguing that the government's ignorance and disregard towards the ever-increasing number of natural disasters, wildfires, disappearing coastlines, mass flooding, droughts, is a threat to their constitutional right to life. This book simultaneously filled me with rage and dread. How did we get here? Why doesn't the government care? What are we going to do? And a kind of hope that feels powerful. Because I know these kids are fighting the good fight and they're giving it their all, and their perseverance is not only inspiring more generations of other kids desperate for change, but adults too. Made in China tells the story of Sun Yi, a political prisoner in a forced labor camp in China, and the SOS letter that begins author Amelia Pang's investigation. In 2012, an Oregon mother named Julie Keith opened up a package of Halloween decorations. The cheap foam headstones had been $5 at Kmart, too good a deal to pass up. But when she opened the box, something fell out that she wasn't expecting. An SOS letter, handwritten in broken English by the prisoner who'd made and packaged the items. Pang's writing is both clear and insightful without being detached. She illustrates the horror and devastation that prisoners like Sun Yi face every day. She also offers a glimmer of hope towards the end, with small things we can do every day to fight for change in the abolishment of forced labor, and some larger, though she admits that we as individuals cannot stop the Chinese government's abuse of power. That's something that will need to be a much larger effort. Big Girl Small Town tells the story of Magella O'Neill, a 20-something-year-old woman living in a small town in Ireland. Magella lives with her mom and works at the chip shop down the road, and most of her days pass her by in the same cyclical routine. There's just one thing, or a few really. Magella's grandmother has recently been brutally murdered, her father is missing, plus the divide and violence between Protestants and Catholics is ever present. But Magella is beginning to realize that her life doesn't need to be defined by any of these things, nor the town that she lives in at all. She wants more out of life, and she wants to change her life. It's just a question of how. Big Girl Small Town is darkly funny and heartwarming. You will be rooting for Magella from the first page until the very last, I promise.